familiar with like orders of protection. If you're a woman, a female victim of a crime, a domestic crime, and you get an order, it's signed by a judge, and it tells your abuser to stay away from you. That's similar, I guess, to what a neighborhood order of protection is for a community. If you have an offender who commits a crime in your neighborhood, and you have the ability to contact the prosecutor, and the prosecutor can present that request to the judge. In some instances, judges will issue a condition to the offender, and they'll say, listen, during the duration of your sentence, if he remains out, you're not to stay, or you're not to go into that neighborhood that the people have asked me to keep you out of. So we've recently done that against an individual who's just like Mr. Black. William Webb is his name. He's got a horrific, he's kind of unassuming young gentleman. He's got a beard and he's kind of short, but he's got an extensive criminal record. And he has been warned and cited and arrested numerous times. And so finally got to the point where we said to the prosecutor in city court, hey, is there some, aggressive panhandling is just that. It's not a matter of just being passive and asking for money or displaying a sign. It's putting people in fear or making them feel uneasy, or it's about 6 pages long, the ordinance, but it's pretty specific about the behavior. So he was recently cited for that again, and we just had a judge issue a neighborhood order of protection against Mr. Webb. He was arrested by the bike officers, and now for the next, well, until his next hearing, which is in March, and then hopefully get it extended further, he is not to come in within the Central West End, which is Kings Highway on the west, Vanderbilt on the east, Forest Park on the south, and Delmar on the north. So he doesn't live in the neighborhood, he doesn't receive any services in the neighborhood, so that's one. Now, Sarah and I didn't introduce Sarah Wickenhauser, she works in the office also, she's back there recording our meeting. We've been looking over at some past data that we have on people who the bike officers have encountered and arrested in the Central West End in the NSI, and so we've got a list of about 7, I think, individuals that we are probably going to be seeking neighborhood orders of protection to keep them out. Now, when Richard Black is getting stopped 10 times by officers, at least, that documented, you multiply that by 8 or 10 individuals, that's taking up a lot of resources and a lot of time from our security. So if we can get those folks out of the neighborhood, at least if it's temporary, so they can focus on the other issues that are going on. Neil Miller with the Circuit Attorney's Office, also a resident of the Central West End, prosecutes cases all the time. Perhaps you'd like to share something regarding neighborhood orders of protection as well.
Well, just very briefly, when someone either pleads guilty or is found guilty of an offense, if he or she gets probation as opposed to some kind of prison sentence, if that person is sentenced to a term of probation, the court can impose conditions of probation. For example, in drug cases, it's very common for the court to impose a condition like you have to go to a drug rehabilitation program. In domestic violence cases, one of the conditions of probation might be you have to take an anger management class or a parenting class. When people are sentenced to probation, one of the conditions of probation the court can set can be a neighborhood order of protection. Judges are more likely to be willing to do that if the individual has a history of committing nuisance-type crimes in a particular area, and especially if the individual doesn't live in the area. So if our office becomes aware of that, we will frequently ask for neighborhood orders of protection. If they live in the neighborhood, that's a problem. Most judges won't say you can't go to the neighborhood you live in. And of course, if people come to court when the person is being sentenced, that is even more helpful in getting the judge to agree to impose that. Now, I'm not as familiar with them, but I think that can be done pre-trial as well. I think if someone has a history of nuisance in an area, committing nuisance crimes in an area, and they're given bond to be out while they're awaiting trial, I think we can also ask the court to impose as a condition of their being out on bond that they not enter a certain area. So if these things are brought to our attention or if we otherwise discover it from our own databases, we'll ask for those.
And they're only as good as, you know, it's just an order. It's an order signed by a judge.
But if they violate it, then they get locked up.
They
Because
can't.
that's a basis to lock them up.
Right.
To revoke the probation.
Sure.
Or to revoke the bond that they're out.
Sure. So there's consequences. It's not a foolproof system, but it is one tool that we can use to address the repeat offenders, the ones that are constantly out there, you know. And everybody knows, I'm not going to preach about the impact that panhandling has had on the area from a business impact. Restaurants who are trying to have outside, now we're heading into the warmer months, you know, outside diners, people getting out of their cars at the parking garages, people just walking their dogs, residents walking their dogs. I mean, it has a huge impact in the area. So it's one of the tools that we're trying to organize. Sarah and I we'd like to come up with a, like Captain Rand said, some sort of court watch group made up of volunteers that live in the Central West End. That, as passionate as I am, I would only imagine that some of the residents would be just as passionate to go down and give their testimony to a judge or write letters on behalf of their block that they live on, things like that. Yes?
If I can just, I don't want to keep you guys here long as you want to be, but regarding that impact statement, or what I call an impact statement, that's something we used just recently in Forest Park Southeast neighborhood, which we patrol down there also. We had an individual that one of our bike officers arrested for a gun charge. He had a gun on him, fired it in the air, officers took him into custody, whatnot. And we asked with the assistance of Washington University and the community over there, if, since they're residents over there and college students, they can form an impact statement for the neighborhood. It made a huge, huge impact in sentencing of the subject. He was found guilty in trial, and because we provided an impact statement to the judge and representatives from the community, I believe, appeared there along with my officers and people from the neighborhood appeared and just gave a victim impact statement as a community. The judge actually sentenced the individual to the maximum amount for that charge, which is not very common. You know, not saying it's not common. I don't want to say it's uncommon, but it was a very great accomplishment. So your voices do go heard in the court system, and so that's why Mr. White's Jim's explaining the importance of your all help, because it does make a difference when it comes to sentencing people and getting people to stay away from the neighborhood.
Absolutely.
I just want to add that
It's a phenomenal tool. You can find out a lot of information on the Circuit Attorney's website. I've got it all here too. As Vera, you said you see some of those and actually forward them to the attorneys handling the cases.
Okay, so I worked a lot with the neighborhood ownership model. I don't know if you guys have seen those brochures that came out of Lafayette. It was an experiment that Lafayette Square did, and now we're expanding to other areas. Like Dutchtown has had a great impact because of it. But the neighborhood impact statements, I just wanted to clarify. You can write a letter, and you can designate somebody to write these letters for you, and have people sign them anonymously. You don't even have to put your name on it, so like the defense attorney wouldn't see it. Like what they do with Lafayette Square is they'll write a letter about how it's impacted them, and then it'll say a resident from the such and such block, a resident from the such and such block, and they all write in what block they live in. So that's definitely helpful, and it's definitely made an impact. And you send those to Rachel Smith, the Community Affairs Bureau. We file them, we make sure they get in the file, and we tell the prosecutor about it so that your voices get heard.
You know, and in the sentence